Welcome to Japanatron.
Hello, welcome to Japanatron. My name's Dave Pavlina. Japanatron is a podcast all about life in Japan and Japanese culture. And you know what? You should know my name by now. Okay, this is like episode 28. So, I don't know. Maybe do I still need to say my name? You know? I guess so. Today's topic is a little academic. I want to present some Japanese study tips when you're learning the language, and specifically some shortcuts that have really aided me in the quest to learn this often puzzling language. Oh my God, this thing has really given me a run for my money in studying it over the years. So these are some shortcuts that have really explained rather challenging topics for me in a very compact and convenient way. So first, a little bit about myself. We're going to talk about me for now. We're not going to talk about you. We're going to talk about me. Number one, I suck at foreign language, okay? I just do. It's just not in my DNA. It's a struggle for me. It always has been. And you sometimes meet people that just have the gift of language. You know, they just pick up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 languages or whatever, and they just navigate between them, and they're just gods at language, and that's the skill that God or the creator or whatever has given this person, and they are just amazing at that. They suck at other things, but language is not one of the things they suck at. Everyone has talents, right? And also everyone has things that they totally suck at. And language is one of those things I just really kind of suck at. I struggle with it. Also, these tips are from a Westerner American perspective. Of course, as always, it kind of reverberates throughout all the episodes of my podcast. I'm an American dude from LA, and that's the perspective you're going to get when listening to this. So, sorry about that. If that's not what you're looking for, maybe look for another podcast. One done by a Korean dude living in Tokyo or something like that. So, it's going to be biased in that sense. Okay, so let's jump into this. The first tip is about wa versus ga. Wow, this one. Wa versus ga. We struggle with this. Japanese learners struggle with this. You going to use wa? Are you going to use ga? Which one are you doing with? Which one are you going with? Oftentimes I just drop it because I hear in conversational Japanese, people when they're speaking, they drop the particle anyway. So you know what? I'll just let the listener figure it out because I don't know. I'm too scared. I'm too scared to pick one because I don't know if I'm right or wrong on this. Wa versus ga. The cool thing about this too is, we struggle with wa versus ga. But the thing I like about English is that we have given Japanese the versus struggle. So they struggle with the versus and we can struggle with wa versus ga. So the world is fair, right? We they got that problem and we got this problem. So it's all fair and happy. Okay, it's all fair in love and war when learning this language. Okay, the best explanation I think I've ever heard that summarizes wa versus ga and the, a nice shortcut to think about is in a book called Making Sense of Japanese by Jay Rubin. And he said that the best way to think of wa is as for. It says, as for this. Watashi wa, as for me. Okay? And it's a really nice, convenient way to think of it. Because when you think of that's what wa is doing, that's what the topic is. Because I've always struggled, what's the topic versus the subject? Like, aren't they kind of the same? Yeah, they might be the same, but they might actually not be. Ga is the grammatical subject, speaking strictly grammar-wise, whereas wa is the topic. It's like, as for this. It kind of sets up contrast. And, you ask native Japanese speakers, and they really can't explain it. it's just kind of like native English speakers can't really explain the versus Why did you choose the instead of there? And there's lots of explanations, but then they just start getting really complicated and long and pretty much impossible to remember because there's all these kind of like, in this case, you'd use this, and this is why. And in this other case, you'd use that, and that's why. And you really can't remember all that. You really can't just build that into your programming. You really have to feel it. And that's what native speakers will tell you. I don't know how to explain it. I just feel it. I don't know the reason. And that's how a native speaker works. You just feel it. And really, as you begin to practice the language, you begin to feel it yourself. I hear a lot of patterns, sentence patterns, and just the ways that native speakers talk. And then the ga or the wa will just kind of flow automatically. But before you're getting to that point, and even with, as the sentences get more complex and longer and more involved, you begin to still struggle, and the same thing happens with Japanese people studying English, especially with the and So I really love that shortcut is wa is as for X, as for this. Okay, and ga is the grammatical subject. So a good example is, I've always hear, XX ga suki desu ka? Do you like? And almost always, some exceptions, almost always hear it's ga, like biru ga suki desu ka? Do you like beer? And why isn't it wa? It's like if you say biru wa suki desu ka, it sets up contrast. As for beer, do you like it? And that might make sense if you say wine ga suki desu ka? And then you're talking about liking wine. Do you like wine? Yeah, I kind of like it. How about you? And then biru wa, as for beer, do you like that? So you're talking about wine, and then now you're switching over, contrast, switching over to beer. You covered the wine topic, now let's switch over to beer. Biru wa suki desu ka? Let's switch the topic of conversation here. We talked about wine, now let's switch it over to beer. Biru wa? And I think that's often why you hear stuff like sore wa. You often hear a pause with wa. Sore wa? As for that? Or sore wa ne. You hear these pauses. As for that. Or even with people's names. Takashi-san wa. We talked about me. Now let's switch the topic of the conversation over to you, to Takashi-san. Takashi-san wa. So, biru ga suki desu ka? Do you like beer? Suki desu. Takashi-san wa. And then you switch it back over to them, and it kind of has that as for you, as for Takashi-san, as for wine, and it sets up that kind of contrast, that kind of bouncy feeling, in the conversation. We're talking about this, now let's bounce over to this, and I think that's really often, you hear that, you hear those pauses with sore wa ne, Takashi-san wa, when we switch it over, and I was often really confused by a simple sentence pattern that has both the subject with ga and a topic with wa. I was always really confused by this because if there's one or the other, you're like, okay, they just picked one. They picked ga over wa or whatever in this sentence. Biru ga suki desu. But when there's both, I was really confused by this. And Remi-chan wa ashi ga nagai desu. I was like, what? Remi-chan is the topic, and then the grammatical subject is her legs are long. Okay, so this one confused me, but it's really convenient when you think of wa as translating directly to English over to as for. As for Remi-chan, she's got long legs. And, the subject of the sentence is her legs. Legs are long. And as for Remi-chan, her legs are long. So that's a great way to translate that because it really conveniently explains what the wa is doing there. As for Remi-chan, her legs are long. And I was always thinking Remi-chan's legs are long. that would be more like Remi-chan no ashi ga nagai, like the possessive, and that confused me. Why don't you just use no there? And that's really what the difference and the nuance would be. Like, you can say that, and I avoided this sentence pattern because I was afraid of it. I would just say like something like Remi-chan no, the possessive, Remi-chan no ashi ga nagai. So her legs are long. And use the possessive, so I would avoid that. But now I finally kind of grasp what is going on with this sentence pattern, with the wa and the ga in the same sentence. And if you think of it as for, and so often you really hear that contrast. You're jumping to a new topic, or you're throwing in something there, and that's what the wa is doing. And it's not 100%, of course. There's always going to be exceptions. That happens in English, of course. We got our irregular verb patterns. But it's a really conveniently well-packaged way to think of wa versus ga. So that has helped me a lot. Thank you, Jay Rubin, for that. And at the end of the episode, I'll cover some other study aids that have kind of helped me as well, of really kind of conveniently thinking about the language in these really well-packaged tips. Because, you can read chapter after chapter after chapter of explanation, but man, it just doesn't stick with me. It's just hard to remember all this and really build it mentally into your programming, And if you think of wa as, as for this, and you hear the sentence patterns that native speakers are using, it just really connects well. And you begin to kind of think like a native speaker, where you're just automatically throwing in the wa or the ga, and you don't really have to think about it. And that is really the key to fluency. Moving on, kanji. Oh yeah, kanji. You hear that? You hear that grumbling in the background? That's the douchebag that lives in my building with the scooter that has the modified muffler. I don't know if the mic picked that up. Hopefully it did. Moving on, kanji. Oh yeah, foreigners hate this, and I'm talking Western foreigners, of course. Chinese people are blessed. They get, they study Chinese characters, and then it translates well. And a lot of Chinese people argue with me. He's like, nah, it doesn't help. I'm like, it does, man. It's kind of like, I guess it's like studying Latin, and then you study Italian and French, any of the Latin-based, languages, even Spanish, and it helps. Studying Latin helps. It's a nice base. Studying Chinese, if you already know Chinese, Mandarin, whatever, the reading and the writing, it is a huge advantage. You got that base there, and I do not have that base. The only base I really have that helps me is the fact that a lot of katakana words are borrowed from English, and that's really the only thing I got. But the Chinese characters, kanji, we always struggle with this. This is a common theme you hear. Oh man, I like Japanese, but that kanji, oh god, that writing system. Few things that have helped me. There's really not much here. You just gotta buckle down and fucking study the shit. Is number one, if you can write it, you can read it. Okay, so try writing them. And this goes against when I was studying psychology, is that rote memorization, just doing it 100 times, is really not that deep in terms of memory encoding. Engaging all your senses, your sight, your sound, even your smell, all of that with, sort of mnemonics to remember things really helps better. And that is true. But I do find that writing the kanji, you get the physical connection with writing it with your hand. You get the muscle memory working there. It does help you remember it. And fortunately, with with technology, with smartphones and computers and the predictive texting, which is unfortunately hurting the literacy of Japanese people, but it is a shortcut and it does help, and I'll be the first to admit I rely on it a lot, where it's so rare where I find myself in a situation where I have to actually handwrite kanji with my hand. I mean, really, the only case I can think of is like my name and my address, when I'm writing it down on some kind of address label. But other than that, it's pretty rare when I'm in a situation where I have to actually write something with my hand. And even when I am in a situation like that, I can bust out my smartphone, and I'm like, what's that kanji again? and I write it down. I'm like, oh, yeah, there it is. And you pop it up on the screen and you can kind of copy it down. So that helps. But, if you can write the thing from memory with your hand, that's the deepest level of memory encoding you have of those characters. And that's really the best level to get to. So write them down. I get some smartphone apps, that have you practice writing the characters. And really the point here is I personally do not like studying individual characters. It's just, it's impossible for me to remember it that way. I don't like studying individual characters. And it just, to me, it seems like a very unnatural way to remember kanji, because kanji appears in words. And that's really the best way, at least for me, for studying it. I like to study words. And then when you learn a word with these kanji in it, then it can translate over to other words. You learn the word for chicken and all the different kinds of chicken dishes that are on a menu. And they're like, oh, yeah. So these are chicken dishes. And then you can kind of, figure out the other chicken stuff. And I like to study with words. Words to me are just a lot more concrete, a lot easier to imagine. They're a lot, more colorful. So I like to study words. So I find some smartphone apps that give me some words. They tell me the word in hiragana, and then you got to write out the kanji for that word. And that to me is a very, a more vibrant, a deeper way to study the kanji. I hate the ones that just give you a character, and then the pronunciations. I like to learn those things through words, or even better through sentences. There's one app I have not yet tried. It's on my wish list that maybe I'm gonna give a try. And another thing is actually I still have an old school PDA, like a Windows Mobile PDA with the stylus. I find that thing has really helped me with studying kanji, because writing it with a stylus is just a lot more natural than writing it with your finger, on these modern smartphones. I know you can get a stylus for, the finger, like for the iPhone. It never seems to match as well with the natural feeling I had with the actual stylus on my old school Windows Mobile PDA. So sometimes I'll still bust that out to study the kanji. But really the tip is, try writing it and study words, study sentences, sentence patterns with the kanji. Don't really do the individual characters. It just never really works out for me. The one app that sticks out for me is called King Kanji, and this is an old school app. This thing goes way back. If you Google it, it's still up there. But I don't think it's ever been ported over to the smartphone platform. This is the program I use on my old school PDA. And maybe it's been ported or something, but that's really been helping me a lot, and still does. It's helped me for years, and it still does. It simply just gives you some words, some vocabulary lists, and then you got to write the kanji, and then it'll tell you if you're right or not, and it'll check your stroke order. So as you're writing it, it'll tell you if you're on the right path. So that really helps as well. That's really the one. I am looking for newer apps. There's a few for the iPhone that I have on my blog that they're okay. The thing I don't like about them is even when they give you words, they will give you the first character, and you do that one, and then you flip the screen over to the second character. And then to me, that's really unnatural. Just give me the whole word and have me write it. And I know it doesn't fit well on that little screen, but man, that's where the stylus really comes in. And I don't know, maybe it would be nice to have an app that actually says we really recommend you use a stylus with this, because that really does help, that natural feeling of writing with, like a writing object in your hand. Writing short blog passages also helps me. So I handwrite out a blog, maybe in Japanese, something pretty short, because if it's too long, I get frustrated and give up. So you got to start short if you're going to do this, and then build up over time to longer and longer passages. And then, I'll have a native Japanese speaker, a friend or a teacher, check them for me. And that has really helped me with the kanji. And you'll find kanji is just sort of like flashlights. They light up. And you'll be walking around, and you're like, oh, dude, I could finally read that sign. I could finally read everything on the menu. And that really encourages me to keep going, because these like flashlights just turn on, and certain things will just light up, stuff that was just a fog to me or I just didn't get. I'm like, oh, that's this fire extinguisher now. Now I know where the fire extinguisher is. Thank you, kanji. Now I can save lives in case of a fire. Yeah. So walking through the train station, I'm like, oh, that's cool. Lights up. These flashlights light up, and I really like that. So reading whole passages or even books, children's books, books initially directed towards foreigners learning Japanese. Those are simpler passages. So when you're getting started out, you might not want to jump into newspapers and things directed towards native speakers, but maybe things like for children or definitely for the foreigners learning Japanese. Those are simpler passages, and they start you out easy, and they start introducing the kanji gradually. And that's what a Japanese teacher did for me. She started introducing these passages, and then I'd read these. And she started building up the difficulty so that, I felt like I was accomplishing something. She started out really simple passages. And then they started getting more difficult, like things about the history of Sony, and stuff like that. And I felt like, oh, wow, I'm really reading like Japanese, like real Japanese. And that's one problem with children's books. You're an adult, and if you're reading about, See Spot Run, it gets boring, and it also is kind of sad. You feel pathetic. You're like, oh my God, I'm reading about spot running. Oh dear, and I'm learning colors today. It's like, oh God, and sometimes people do recommend, stuff for children, and it can help. But the problem I do have with this is I feel like an idiot. I feel ridiculous. Whereas things directed towards adults, foreign adults learning Japanese, you don't have that problem so much. They don't assume you're an idiot yet. And they're not teaching you colors of the rainbow, and jumping, and using the toilet. Oh, let's use the toilet today. Okay, children? And you and David, you use the toilet too. Can you use the toilet? Are you still using diapers? Okay, let's grow up here. So, yeah, I would recommend a little bit more the stuff directed towards, targeting the foreigners learning Japanese, and then build up from there. There's apps and stuff that will build up from there, and then they'll start giving you stuff that is, what native speakers would read. And it really gives you that sense of accomplishment. You're reading a whole passage, you're reading books, and that really does help. So that's the stuff I've learned with kanji, and kanji is a bitch. And people who just absorb kanji, like the people who have the gift of language, first of all, fuck you. We covered that. F you. But yeah, I really do envy you. People who just can remember this stuff. I mean, even native speakers of Japanese people forget kanji. And you see them busting out the smartphone and tracing the stroke order in the air with their finger, and they're like, what is it? This happens a lot with the young people, and the old people are always making fun of the young generation, criticizing them for forgetting the kanji. So thank God for smartphones. That helps me out. That's probably why I haven't been fired from my job yet, is online translation software and websites and predictive texting. Yeah, that's why I still have a job. Thank God for that email stuff. You can take your time with it. So that's the cool thing. Okay, so practice those tips. Next, Keigo. Oh yeah, we hate Keigo. Oh yeah, the honorific, the humble, this long language. These different levels. I am humbling myself before you, my honored emperor. I'm raising the other person up. I am lowering myself down. That's always the way you got to do it. And God, I'm so glad I don't have a sales job, because I would be fired from that so quick. I would be fired from that so fast. Here's the door, buddy. I do not ever want a sales job in Japan. And foreigners that have sales jobs in Japan, even, clerks in stores, and they're doing the Keigo, I respect you, man. I respect you. Those sales jobs where you're doing sales calls and talking to customers directly, I respect you. I get fired from that so quickly. And the best thing I've learned with Keigo, the little Keigo that I do use at work, because it's nice to be polite. Japanese people have some expectations. When you first meet someone, they're not going to be your best buddy. You can't give them a hug and a kiss on the cheek. They'll forgive you for that, especially if you don't look Asian. But yeah, it might freak them out a little bit. So the Keigo definitely helps. The way I learn Keigo is not through any kind of rules or here's how to convert that, from relatively polite speech to extremely polite keigo. It just never sticks with me. Really, the way I do this is through sentence patterns. And in fact, you feel this, I feel this with the way Japanese speak keigo. It is all protocol. And just think of keigo as that. It's all protocol. You may not like it, but you just got to get it over with and spit it out. It's like R2-D2 and C-3PO. Which one? R2-D2. C-3PO, right? He's the protocol droid, right? He's all about protocol. You got to follow these protocols, and you just got to spit it out. And you don't think about the meaning. You don't think about it. You just spit it out. And this is often the way I feel when I'm speaking keigo. And when I go to Lawson or a convenience store and they're speaking keigo back to me, I can tell it's just spit it out. It's just protocol. Japanese people, especially the younger generation, they view keigo like this. Just spit it out. I don't care what it means. I don't think about it. We just have to say this to the customer. God, spit it out. Okay? They don't really mean it. And you can feel keigo almost it defeats its purpose, its own purpose, because in this day and age, they don't really mean it mostly. Especially, I'm speaking especially about the younger generations, and like those working convenience stores. They don't care. They don't want to do it. They don't really care about the meaning. They just have to, and they roll their eyes and they spit it out. And it defeats the purpose because it makes the keigo, which is supposed to be really polite, it makes it rude. So I don't know. I just find that funny. I learn it through sentence patterns. And, there's not much vocabulary diversity here. It's just protocol fluff. And once you learn the patterns, you can just sort of insert them and make them more polite to make them the keigo version. And a good example of this is osewa ni natte orimasu, which is, I say it on the phone all the time. Osewa ni natte orimasu. And you just practice that expression. Osewa ni natte orimasu. When I first heard it and I was learning this expression, I was like, osewa ni natte orimasu. And I asked for a translation, like what each word in that means. Thank you always for your help or whatever. Don't think about the meaning because it'll just confuse you even more. Just memorize the pattern because it doesn't change much. You can often just inject it. You hear the same things over and over again, especially on the phone. You hear that. In email, you start, nani nani sama, Tanaka sama, osewa ni natte orimasu, Pabrina to moshimasu, and you have these patterns, name plus moshimasu, and all these kinds of things. And once you learn those patterns, you learn these sentence structures, it's very, it's much easier to just use keigo more naturally. I don't really think much about the actual meaning or the translation of what the keigo is actually saying. It'll just confuse you even more. It gets really confusing because it's so polite. What direction is it going and all that? Who's itadakiing and what, So there's not much diverse vocabulary here. The direction can be confusing. Who's doing what? But the saving grace here is that the words are different. Itadaku is you. You're partaking in something, okay? You're eating something, you're partaking in someone doing a favor for you, which can confuse you. But you are you're doing the itadakiing. You're doing the itadaku, okay? You don't really want to say someone else, the person you're speaking to is itadakiing, because that's going to be rude. You got the words for you, and you got the words for them. And again, it's just vocabulary, and there's really not that much. So once you got the words for you got the words for them, you can just kind of insert, the different topics in there, depending on the situation. And there's really not much situations you're using keigo. You're using it with customers, you're using it with, your superiors, your bosses, somewhat, older people, maybe your girlfriend's family, your boyfriend's family, and you're using sama, there's not too much vocabulary. You just got to remember vocabulary for me, vocabulary for you, And as you practice those patterns, you start getting used to it. Really, the most confusing one for me of all the keigo is like the tsukawasete itadakimasu. That's me. So I'm doing. I will partake in you allowing me to use this. I will use this. So again, you're itadaking. That's you're talking about. You're partaking in something, but you're partaking in them allowing you to use it. So again, perfect example. You get the translation, and it just confuses you even more. But when you hear that same verb, tsukawasete itadakimasu, I would just learn that pattern, tsukawasete itadakimasu, because you're not going to hear a real diverse amount of verbs inserted into that pattern. It's often use, allow me to take a day off of work, There's not too many different verbs you're going to stick in there because the situations where you're using keigo are fairly limited, So I would just learn the pattern, tsukawasete itadakimasu. And I don't even think about what the translation is. So those are tips for keigo. Last, few little 1-point lesson tips. Here we go. Find a model, okay? This is the big thing I find, is I imitate coworkers, I imitate celebrities, and most of all, I imitate Japanese teachers. I had this Japanese teacher when I was first learning Japanese in LA. Her Japanese was just immaculate. It was heavenly. It was like butter. God, it just felt like warm butter, how beautiful her pronunciation was. She really made the Japanese language just so attractive to me. It's just like warm butter rolling off of bagels to me. And I find a model, and I imitate the model. Often you can find celebrities you like or newscasters. Often newscasters have the most beautiful Japanese. People who do voiceovers in Japanese, or even announcements in like a department store. Honjitsu wa itadaki. Arigatou gozaimasu. One thing you got to be really careful here, though, is careful with the gender appropriateness when it comes to imitating the native speakers. If you're a guy, you might want to find some guy models. If you're a girl, you might want to find some girl models, of course, because if you're going to imitate the opposite sex, your Japanese is going to sound girly, or it's going to sound really manly when it shouldn't be. And this happens a lot. I'm a dude, and a lot of Japanese teachers are women, and you'll go out with a girl, your girlfriend, and you'll speak just like your girlfriend. You'll sound real feminine, and people will make fun of you. And I read a book recently on conversational Japanese, and it was talking about the gender appropriateness. And I was like, oh my God, I've been doing that for like over a decade now. I've been talking like a girl, okay? And one huge hurdle you have with learning Japanese, which I always point this out to Japanese people, is they are too polite. They are too polite to correct you. They'll put on the tatemae, the mask, and they will just keep a straight face, but inside they are giggling their asses off at your feminine Japanese, at your messed up Japanese. And that is a huge challenge that foreigners face, is the Japanese people will never correct them. And that's why we have to pay a teacher to correct us. And we have to force that teacher over and over again. Please correct me. You have to be boot camp with me. You have to be... what is it, Colonel Slaughter? Corporal Slaughter with Japanese. You gotta be a total boot camp instructor with me when it comes to correcting me, because you're not gonna get that from a lot of native speakers. Your friends, even your girlfriend, boyfriend, your family, your in-laws, whatever. They're never gonna correct you. They're just gonna keep giggling inside, and that kind of sucks, man. That's where the politeness of Japanese really backfires. That kind of sucks. So careful with the gender appropriate speech. You might want to find models that are of your same gender. Women, I find, unfortunately for me, since I'm a guy, women I generally find speak more beautiful Japanese. But men should not always imitate it because you're going to sound feminine. But when it comes to pronunciation and just, the beauty of the Japanese language, especially when it's spoken, women just do a better job. And that's true, I find, in English as well. American women, they speak better English than men. And that's true. That's true all over the place. Japanese men, and I'm like, hi. And it's hard. It's a challenge to find a guy that actually speaks really, really beautiful Japanese. But once that's why I often target newscasters, because they speak, guys, women, or whatever, they speak beautiful Japanese, and it makes a beautiful model to follow. So yeah, be careful with the whole sounding like your girlfriend or your very feminine teacher. If you're a guy, I don't know, find like a teacher who's really like masculine, talks like a dude. That would help. Diversify. Get lots of different models. It'll help you kind of diversify your sentence patterns. Even native speakers have favorite expressions and favorite ways of speaking. And often I find myself really latching on to one or the other. One person doesn't really always satisfy me. I really connect with this expression that this person uses, or an expression that another person uses. So diversify. And I have a funny story about this. A coworker often reacted with "majide," which apparently is very feminine. I didn't know this, and I connected with that. And I found myself often saying as a reaction, it means seriously? Really? Seriously? Majide? And I said it in a really feminine way, too. And it got me in trouble. And someone finally stopped me. I think it was actually a foreign woman. And said, you gotta stop doing that, man. It's really femme. And often the people who correct your Japanese will not be Japanese people because they're too polite to do so. It'll be other foreigners that speak really a lot better than you do. Really fluent, really peta foreigners will correct you, and that helps you. Other friends that are other foreign friends you have that are better at Japanese than you are, those are really good models too. They will be brutal. They will correct your Japanese, so that often helps too as a model. Even though they're not native speakers, they're better at Japanese than you are, and so that to me is a role model. They'll correct you. Oftentimes too, when you're imitating a model, imitate the breaks and the pauses. This really helps you sound natural. It's amazing. Even when you're speaking and you break up, you're thinking, don't say in English when you're speaking in Japanese. It'll make you sound really foreign. Instead, what you want to do is you speak. You can hear my daughter in the background. Sorry about that. She's saying tadaima over and over. Okaeri. I had a student that did this in English, and it made him sound amazing. He sounded really at home in the language. It was almost like a trick, because it made him. I think it made him sound better than he really was. But he was always going, let me see. And when he did that, I was like, damn! It raised him up to a new level. And when you do that in Japanese, so nan desu ka? It tricks the Japanese native speakers into thinking you're way better. And nihongo jouzu desu ne. You say between, and man, it really, to their ear, it makes you sound way better than you really are. It tricks the hell out of them. And I had a student, this is a funny story, a 16-year-old high school girl. She was my student in English, and then she took a year off. She went a year abroad in Australia. And it's so interesting when people do this, students do this, because you see after they come back after a year, the incredible change. Sometimes it's not so incredible because they'll study in a place like Vancouver, which is like the worst. It's like the black hole for English study. Because apparently in Vancouver, there's a lot of Japanese people, and oftentimes the students will go there and they'll hang out with Japanese people the whole time for the whole year, and they will learn almost no English. And they'll come back and they're like even worse. They're even worse off. But no, she studied in Australia, and it was a total change. It was amazing. And she came back, and her English was so much better. But it was funny because it sounded like an Australian boy. She was like, "Hello, David. How you doing?" And it sounded so weird to me because the sound was coming out of a 16-year-old Japanese girl with like double ponytails, in the whole schoolgirl outfit, and it was just mind-blowing. It was a total mind fuck to me. I'm like, whoa, what happened to you? You're an Australian dude. Hey, good day, David. It was like that really guttural, like deep, boyish Australian accent that she had. And I said to her, did you have a boyfriend in Australia? She's like, yeah, I wanted to take him home with me in my suitcase. I was like, whoa, we got it. Okay, your English is amazing. Okay, it is in a totally new level now. Okay, you just blew out your existing level. You're totally new level now. But let's work on that accent. Okay, we got to feminize your English a little bit there. Sounds real boyish. But so that was kind of messing with me. But the same thing can happen to you, to you Japanese speaker, you student of Japanese. So be careful. You can sound real girly, okay, or real boyish in Japanese. And that same effect, it's going to have that same effect on the Japanese people. Like, whoa, what is up with this dude? Real girly. Be careful with that. So, find the model, okay? And diversify and find some models that you respect that are of your same gender. Because that'll definitely help you with the appropriateness of your speaking. Last but not least, study aids. The last section I want to cover here. And recently I've been really into English explanations of Japanese. And I used to think that these English explanations of Japanese were bad for study. That there's kind of like a crutch or something you're really relying on that you should really just throw out. But man, I gotta say, there's value in it. So if you're learning the language in Japanese entirely, a lot of people say, there's a lot of value in that, of course. You think like a native, right? And you're immersing yourself entirely in the language. You're not relying on the English as a crutch. But man, I gotta say, I used to think that was the way to go, and that was the only way to go, and that English explanations were just going to really hold me back. But I disagree. I think both types of studying English explanations of Japanese, as well as immersing yourself entirely in the native Japanese, I think both of them have advantages. So I've been really into that recently. I've been picking up books and some smartphone apps that explain Japanese in English, because they've really opened my eyes in certain ways. Because if you're learning this language later in life as an adult, I don't think you're ever going to really be capable of picking it up like a native. Your accent certainly is never going to be native. You lose that around age 12 or 13. So if you're studying the language well into adulthood, you're fucked. You're never going to get that native accent. And that's fine. I'm happy with that. I can accept that. But I do find that these English explanations of Japanese have cleared up just a lot of confusion that have lingered for years. And it's confusion that really you're never going to understand, at least me, that struggles with this language so much. I'm never satisfied. I never really get the explanation if it's given to me in Japanese. I'm a non-native speaker. I just can't understand the native Japanese explanation of these elements of their own language. And when it's given really clearly and really well done, if it's a really well done explanation in English, I'm like, whoa, that's a cool way to think about it. And it just really lights things up and really clears up the fog. And the best example I have is that wa versus ga. Wa is as for. Oh, okay, that's what's going on there. And Japanese people can just explain it in Japanese until the cows come home, but I just still don't get it, And oftentimes Japanese people have the same problem. They want to, I was giving them an English class, and the rule is it has to be only in English, and a lot of students want that. It sounds really cool on paper, and there are advantages to it, but then after class, they run over to a Japanese speaking teacher, a native Japanese native Japanese speaking teacher that also is an English teacher, and they get the explanation in Japanese, and then they go, oh, that's what's going on. So they want it too. And you know what? I want it. There are advantages to it. So I wouldn't shun it entirely. I used to, and I regret that. And I wish I had picked up these books and these smartphone apps years and years ago, because the English explanations have really enlightened me. So yeah, there's that. And like I said, the big problem is, Japanese people are too polite to correct you. So that helps you a lot too. The Japanese people aren't going to correct you. So an English explanation, oh, that's what's going on. Finally, I get something clear and direct of what's going on here. And like I said before, you get a fellow foreigner that's really good at Japanese, better than you. They can say, oh, no, what's going on here is this. And they explain it to you in English, and you're like, whoa, thank you for that. That has cleared up years of confusion. So don't shun English explanations. They definitely have a huge advantage over just studying exclusively in Japanese. So that's a study aid I really have really latched onto, especially recently. A few examples of this. Human Japanese. This is a smartphone app I found, and it is an English explanation of the language, of the mechanics of the language, and a lot of things that are going on in Japanese. And this guy is a genius at explaining this. If you Google it, Human Japanese, it's in the app stores and whatever. There's 2 levels. He does a beginner and intermediate. I'm really hoping for advanced. The guy has the gift of explaining this language in English, and it's amazing. He also covers wa versus ga, and he does a really good job of it. Real succinct, really clear, really short, which helps. Because once the explanation gets too long, I just forget it. I can't remember all that. And he does it really clearly, really concisely, really well done. Props to Human Japanese. That app has really, I really got my money's worth out of that guy. Making Sense of Japanese. I mentioned this one at the beginning of the podcast. This is a book by Jay Rubin. It's fairly academic. A lot of times it goes on too long, in my opinion. It's very academic. I think it's really written for people studying translation, if you really want to get extremely accurate translations of the language. I do not have such aspirations. So a lot of his essays in here are a little too much for me, but his explanations of some things I've struggled with are really, really well done. So it is a valuable book. But be prepared for an academic hayride with that one. Another one I really like, last but not least, it's Tai Kim's Guide to Learning Japanese. This is an app. You'll find it in the app stores. It's on my iPhone. I don't know if it's in the Android. I think it is. I think both Human Japanese and Tai Kim's Guide to Learning Japanese are in both. Tai Kim's is free, so really you can't lose with that one. It's a free app. It's another one of those that goes through chapters that explains things in English. Again, really well done, really concise, clears up a lot of the fog I've had for years with this language. So props to these apps and book. Thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed these tips and shortcuts for learning Japanese. Please like me on Facebook, iTunes, leave your comments. Go to Japanatron.com. That will take you to the podcast section of my main site that has my blog. That's mondaiji.com. Japanatron.com is basically a shortcut to the mondaiji.com. So either one, you get to the same place. And like me, review me, give me feedback, tell me what else you want to hear. That's one reason, actually, I don't update this podcast so much, is I just kind of wait to be inspired with a episode. I don't want to just talk about what I ate for breakfast or how my coffee was that morning. Some people do podcasts like that, like every day or every week. Mine come out not so often because I wait for a good topic to kind of come to me, something that will help people or something that's interesting to listen to. And I don't know, I think my breakfast this morning is not really podcast worthy, okay? Unless I eat like a bowl of dog food or something. So, thank you for listening. You have a good day. All right? Toodles.
Welcome to Japanatron. 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 Japanatron.
have received this transmission from the Comedy Podcast Network. For more shows, visit comedypodcastnetwork.com.